Hello students, this is Jessup. I'm giving you here a sentence structure overview. So from this video, you should be able to review what you already know about sentence structure and take a look at some of the common mistakes and hopefully learn how to identify and avoid those mistakes. First, couple notes on this video. This is a review video. It's going to go super fast and I'm going to skip some of the details. So sorry about that in advance. The terms I use may be a little different than what your textbook or what other teachers use. Again, sorry about that, but there's no way to avoid that really. And what I want you to focus on is more the mistakes and how to avoid them. Don't worry too much about the terms, the way you talk about these problems. Okay, with that said, let's go. So when we're talking about sentence structure, we're talking about how the sentence is built. Obviously, you want to build good sentences. So how do you build sentences? Well, you build them out of clauses, basically. So in ESL, what do we mean by a clause? We mean part of a sentence that has subject and verb in it, and that verb has a tense. That's what we mean in ESL. So take a look at a few examples here. The students are studying hard is a sentence. It's got a period on the end, but it's also a clause. It's got a clause in it, and the verb here is are studying. I find that it's often easiest to pick out the verb first. That's the thing that carries the tense, right? The verb has to have a tense on it, and you probably can recognize that that's present progressive tense. The subject goes with that verb. It's the thing doing that action. So are studying is the verb. And I could ask you who is studying or who are studying, and you're going to say the students. So that subject goes with that verb. When we have a group of words with subject-verb combination, that's going to be a clause. So take a look quickly at the last sentence here. Because they never studied for it, the test was too difficult for them. Here you can see there are actually two different verbs, each with a tense. And each of those verbs has a subject that goes with it. So when we're looking at that sentence, we'll say there are two clauses there. So it's helpful to know what a clause is. Now, let's look at some sentence types. So the first sentence type we're going to look at is just simple sentences. Every sentence has to have a main clause, an independent clause. What we mean by that is that it's a clause that doesn't depend on anything else. It can stand totally by itself. And simple sentences only have that one clause. So very simple, right? The students are studying hard. There's one verb, there's one subject, the verb has a tense. That's a simple sentence. You could make a longer sentence, but it still may only have one verb in it. Like here we have will rule is the verb and the subject is robot cars, and that's one sentence. Just keep in mind, every single sentence has to have a main clause in it. Normally. Okay. Now, what happens if you want to put together two main clauses? Well, that's the compound sentence. So a compound sentence is just two or more main clauses. When you're putting together two main clauses, they are totally equal. They are both main. They do not depend on anything else. You're just taking basically what you had with two simple sentences and you're putting them together. There are only two ways to do that. Only two ways to do that. One way is with a comma plus a coordinator. So coordinator, conjunction, coordinating conjunction. There are many words for this, but I'm talking about and, but, so, or, for, nor, or yet. Exactly one of those words. Or you could use a semicolon. So let's look at an example. We could say, unfortunately, it rained yesterday. That's a simple sentence with the main clause in it. We could say, they will try again tomorrow. Different sentence, different main clause. If you want to add those together, you must do it in one of these two ways. You could either put a comma and a conjunction, like these first two, or you could put a semicolon. That is it. Those are the only two ways to combine two main clauses where you have two clauses of equal weight. Okay. However, there are different ways to put together sentences. Instead of having two main clauses, you could actually have one main clause And then you might have another clause, but it's part of something else in the sentence. It's dependent on something else in the sentence. So complex sentences have at least one dependent clause, otherwise known as a subordinate clause, in addition to your main clause. So what makes them dependent is that they depend on something else in the sentence. They are not main, they cannot stand by themselves. Let's take a look at an example or two. I live in Santa Monica because I am a student at SMC. In this sentence, I live in Santa Monica is main. It doesn't depend on anything else. That live is actually the main verb in the sentence. That's the main clause. Look at this over here. This looks like a clause. It is a clause. I am a student at SMC. It does have a subject and a verb, and the verb has a tense, but it's part of something else in the sentence. It's depending on something else in the sentence. I would say it's depending on this word because. It's part of what because is doing in this sentence. It's part of this phrase that's started by because. So this part over here, this is not the main clause. It's added on to the main clause. So when you do that, when you have a clause as part of something else going on in the sentence, teachers like to call this, textbooks like to call it complex sentences. I don't care whether you call it that or not in my class, but it may be helpful for you to see how clauses could not be main, how they could depend on something else. And you could pause the video anytime and look at more examples of these, or we can talk about it in class, of course. Now, I want to get on to talking about common errors that are related to this. And there are really just a few common sentence errors that come up over and over and over again. So if you can avoid these, you're awesome. Okay, error number one, fragment. Fragment just means part, not a whole thing. It's part of a thing, incomplete thing. So we said before, every sentence has to have a main clause with a subject and a verb, right? So a sentence that's missing a main clause, missing a subject, or missing a verb is a fragment. It's incomplete, and that's a bad thing, okay? So take a look at these three sentences, pause the video if you want, and tell me, what are they missing? Why are they a fragment? So number one, is a great place to study. What's it missing? It's missing the subject. You'd have to say like, the library is a great place to study. So there's something wrong with that sentence. Number two, she very tall, but her brother is short. So it looks here like we have two clauses, two main clauses, but the first one is missing a verb. There's no verb there. So we need to add the verb. Probably is would be a good one. Number three, although you studied hard for the test. So here you do have a clause, you studied hard for the test, but it's part of what although is doing. It's dependent on although. We don't have a main clause here. So you'd have to add a main clause. You need a main clause. So for example, although you studied hard for the test, you didn't pass. And you didn't pass would be independent, would be main. So that'd be a way to solve that problem. Another really common error is comma splice or run-on. And these are kind of very similar to each other, really. So if your sentence has two main clauses, remember how to connect main clauses. You're going to need a coordinator or a semicolon. And if you don't use that, then you're going to have an error. If you just put a comma, that error is called a comma splice. And if you don't put anything at all, that's going to be a run-on. But they're both errors, so let's look at some examples. I studied hard for the test, comma, I got an A. What we have is main clause, comma. But comma doesn't connect main clauses. Only coordinator or a semicolon can do that. So this is a mistake. Number two, I'm from China. I live in the United States. Main clause, no connection, run on. Okay, last one. I'm from China, comma, however, I live in the United States. Here, main clause, comma. That's a comma splice. Now, you may say, what students usually say at this point is, well, I'm using however. But however is not a coordinator, so it cannot connect two main clauses. We'll talk about words like however sometime later in life, but we're running out of time on this video, right? So, last thing, how can you fix these sentences? Maybe you already know, that's great, but let's look. If a sentence is a fragment, then it's missing something. So this is very easy. To correct it, just add what it's missing. We talked about this one before. Although you studied hard for the test is a fragment. So what's it missing? Main clause. So just add a main clause. This one's a little trickier. If a sentence is a comma splice or run-on, you have many options for how to fix it. So we just saw this one before. I studied hard for the test, comma, I got an A. So the problem here is the two main clauses are not connected correctly. So you could do a few things. You could add a conjunction, keeping the comma. You could change it to a semicolon. You could actually change the structure of the sentence, and you could make one of the clauses dependent on something else. So you could say, because I studied hard for the test, I got an A. Now you're okay, because now you only have one main clause. That's good. Or you could just separate them, just put a period, and then you can have two sentences. That's fine too. Okay, we did it. We got through the whole thing, except I spelled surprising wrong in the last slide. So this last bit is a practice quiz. And if you're taking my class, then you probably need to do this for part of your homework. I want you to pause the video or look at the slides independently and tell me what's wrong with these sentences. So you can use any terminology you want. I don't care, but you should be able to explain what the problem is and then have an idea about how to fix it in some very easy way. So that's your assignment. Otherwise, leave a comment if you want on the YouTube. I will check it out. Otherwise, catch me in class if you're in my class. Hope this was clear enough for review. Okay, see you guys. Bye.